There we go. We're going to start. And with that, you are in the session called the Open Textbook Initiative at Wayne State, a conversation between faculty, library, and student partners. And with that, I turn it over to all of our presenters.
Thank you, Gina, so much. I'm going to be moderating the session today. We'll do introductions in just a moment, actually, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Joshua Ned Fox, to start us off.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I guess. I'm Joshua Ned Fox, and in solidarity with our Wayne State University Student Senate, I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. We're here in Michigan, and Wayne State University rests on Wahweotenong, the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Wyandot nations. Wayne State University affirms Indigenous sovereignty and honors all tribes with a connection to Detroit. And I specifically note that we advance our educational objectives here on a foundation of colonial violence and erasure, for which this acknowledgement does the absolute bare minimum of reparation. If you are interested in taking responsibility for your own learning, I urge you perhaps to start by engaging with the students involved in Wayne State University's Native American Student Organization, who helped advocate for the original text of this land acknowledgement, which I've adapted today to remove the implicit assertion that the 1807 Treaty of Detroit, which passed these lands over to United States sovereignty, justifies the destruction and theft of Indigenous lands, peoples, and cultures. All right. I've added a link to the Native American Student Organization's Facebook page, which is where they maintain their information, and so you can visit that if you like. Maybe we can move to the next slide, Cheryl. Are we going to do, we're going to start by prefacing with a little bit of background about the projects that we're going to talk to you about today, so that you have some sense of what it is we're roundtabling about. So this is the Wayne State University Library System's OER initiatives. And we've had open education initiatives in the library system for something going on a decade, mostly led and tirelessly led by our student success librarian, Veronica Belat. This has included visits from OpenStax, a faculty open textbook workshop lunch with David Ernst and the then Open Education Network, Open Textbook Network, which resulted in multiple open textbook reviews in the Open Textbook Library, and 2 rounds of open textbook adoption grants funded out of the library system and the Office for Teaching and Learning that were administered by partnerships across campus. Bottom line is that we keep throwing spaghetti at the wall to see if we can make something stick at Wayne State University. And Veronica every year just regirds and goes for it again, iterates over what did or did not work on the previous year and tries something new. In the 2018-2019 term, Wayne State Student Senate under President Stuart Baum passed a resolution supporting the adoption of OER in courses at Wayne State University. These are, of course, non-binding resolutions, but Stuart was not satisfied to leave it at that, and he reached out to Veronica, or perhaps vice versa. They began working together to build some bridges between the library, the liaisons, my unit, which is the library publishing unit. And what they came up with is perhaps sending a proposal to the provost to recommend funding open textbook development at WSU. Let's see if we can get the president's office to kick in some money to pay faculty to write open textbooks to be used at Wayne State University. And along with Stuart and my unit and the library system and some other partners, we began to co-develop cost estimates and an argument in support of this project, and write a proposal, a letter of inquiry, with Stuart and Student Senate President-elect Ria Chabra to the provost. And that resulted in the fall of 2019, or summer of 2019, about $50,000 in presidential funding for 2 open textbook grants targeted at upper level courses at Wayne State University. We understood that there were plenty of open textbooks of fantastic quality that could be adopted in lower level courses, but it would be good to get some very specific textbooks for upper level courses that we could run in classes at Wayne State University, which paid for a faculty stipend and production and peer review costs. My colleague Cheryl Ball, Dr. Cheryl Ball, and I put together a couple of kickoff workshops. We co-conducted a grant application workshop for interested faculty responding to our request for proposals. In the early part of the year, and we followed up in spring with an open textbook publishing workshop for Open Educational Resources Week. So this is sort of all of the work that we did in gearing up to this initiative. And I think Cheryl is going to talk about the second half of this background here.
Yes, thank you, Joshua. So when we held the workshop for faculty members, staff, lecturers across campus to see who would be interested in producing an OER, we had a lot of people showed up, which surprised us given how few people tend to show up for OA types of open access types of workshops. So we had a great turnout, and that ended up with a great number of proposals, way more than we expected to get for these 2 textbook slots. And through the process of receiving all of these proposals, we also knew that we needed to come up with, we had to create the RFP for the proposal based on some of the criteria that Joshua mentioned, including that these textbooks needed to target upper division classes. We also wanted to know what the cost benefit would be for students, and which textbooks might have the greatest impact where that was concerned. So we ended up creating a proposal that would ask the faculty to describe what they were going for, as well as, of course, the content of the book itself and an outline of that. And then we wanted to create an evaluation heuristic for a group of people who would come together to review these proposals. So in order to create, so the proposal process went really well. We got over a dozen submissions for these 2 slots, which we thought was just spectacular. We were really excited about that. Been really excited by the breadth of work that people were interested in submitting across campus. And then we began to do some bridge building in terms of who needed to sit on the proposal evaluation committee. So this is a collaboration between the library, our Office of Teaching and Learning, which runs an annual grant process called the Educational Development Grant, EDG grant, which gives funds for folks doing pedagogical projects. And they already had a body of teachers put together that the president's or provost office had picked through a sort of a fellowship process that were star teachers on campus. And so we were able to collaborate with those groups to use that body of reviewers for the proposal process. And then also on the proposal review process, Joshua and I sat in sort of ex officio status so that we would be able to flag any issues in the proposals that we thought might hinder the production of these OER in ways that the faculty reviewers, the content specialists, wouldn't necessarily know. So in addition to Joshua and I on this committee of I believe there were 5 or 6 faculty from across campus on it, student senate representatives also sat in on it so that the student voices would continue to be heard. And they provided an excellent source of feedback for us through that process. So we picked the 2 books that we were going to move forward with. We were a little sad though that we couldn't pick more, but we didn't have the funding, and we wanted to ensure that the stipends were high enough to reward the faculty who were undertaking this endeavor. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. But we also began creating, strategizing what our timeline for production might be. So Joshua and I sat down and said, okay, if we've got the proposals now and we want these books to be ready by January of 2022 for that winter term, what do we need to do? You know, how does the production process look, and how does the developmental process with authors look? So we came up with a bunch of workflows and timelines for how and when we would meet with authors. Of course, not knowing that COVID would become a thing at the time, but it quickly did, and we all pivoted to be able to meet on Teams for everything. And then in terms of work distribution, the way that it ended up breaking down was along our lines of expertise. And so Joshua and I were taking lead on the development and production parts of these processes along with the authors. And so given my background in developmental editing, I took the lead on sort of facilitating the authors through their writing process, and Joshua has taken the lead on issues of checking on copyright issues with images, and taking the lead on some of the more production and technical aspects of like where we're going to put these OER when we're done, since these are the first that we've come through the system with. He and I also worked together with some student interns to take the model digital publishing agreement that's published by U of M and University of Minnesota. If I got that right, Joshua? No.
Emory.
Emory, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm doing it from memory here. So we took the model publishing agreement and adapted it for our own purposes for a CC BY licensed OER. Because some of as we presented at Library Publishing Forum, and you can go see that recording, a lot of that MOU as it originally existed was still held some commercial values that weren't really necessarily relevant to OER publishing out of the libraries. So we created all of this documentation to work on this process, and set up some outside vendors for copy editing. And at that time, we happened to be in a situation where there was some end of year funding that needed to be used up very quickly. And so we were very, very excited to be able to go back to some of the other authors who had stellar proposals and invite them and say, okay, we don't have enough money, unfortunately, to pay you an author stipend, but what we do have is money to pay for the copy editing process, for the production process, right? And so if you're still willing to move forward on your textbook, then we would love to produce it for you. And so we were able to get 2 more books that way. And Professor Wadera, who's here with us today on the panel, is one of the faculty members who fell into that latter camp. And he's one of our real OER star examples that we're excited to talk about. So on that note, I'm going to introduce the rest of the panelists. And I don't know whether Elizabeth ever made it into the session or not. I don't see her.
I haven't seen her, Cheryl.
Okay.
I got an email from her. She's not going to be able to make it.
Okay.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, so we're having some medical things happening today. So unfortunately, Caitlin Zeem, who was our amazing intern, and she was going to moderate our panel today, and she worked one-on-one with a lot of the authors. She is out sick this week, sort of an unexpected thing. And Dr. McQuillan as well, who is one of our authors, isn't able to make it with us today. But we can fill in some of the blanks from some of their information. But we do have Dr. Yohendra Wadera from the Department of Physics and Astronomy, who has this amazing textbook, Mathematics for Biomedical Physics, that he'll be sharing with us, and some of his experiences around that. We have Clayton Hayes, who is a half-time digital publishing librarian and a half-time research support librarian in many areas in the library, including mathematics. And he has a background in math, and so he became an instrumental part of our team when we started working with Joe and his book. And then, of course, my colleague Joshua Ned Fox, who's the coordinator of the Digital Publishing Initiative at Wayne State Libraries, and myself, who's the director of the Digital Publishing Collaborative. So with that, I'm going to go into the roundtable, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can go into my notes here and say that I'd like us to begin by asking, by starting with Joe and asking him, like, what compelled you to propose an open educational resource to begin with, and what motivated you to keep going, especially during the pandemic? Oh, you're still muted.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. I would be very happy to share with you and everybody else my experiences of creating a new textbook, which is coming out pretty soon. Actually, the story starts with the new degree program that our department started a few years ago in biomedical physics. The Department of Physics at Wayne State is just like any other department of physics, a very traditional physics and astronomy is what we teach. But we decided that let's try a new program in biomedical physics, where we'll be making use of concepts and applications of physics to medicine and biology. So to start this program, there were a few faculty members, some from our department, some from biology department, and some from our School of Medicine. And they sat down and they tried to make a list of courses that students in this program will be taking. There are 5 or 6 courses, most of them related to biology and medicine. But there was one particular course which is mathematics for biomedical physics, which they wanted our department to teach. Because there are some courses of this program which are also taught in School of Medicine for them. So when they started this particular course, mathematics for biomedical physics, they made out a list of topics which this course should include. And pretty soon we realized that there is not a single textbook which covers all of those topics. So as a result, either we had to assign 2 or more textbooks for that course, which will be a very expensive proposition, or they wanted us to write down our own notes as instructors, which we can give out to students. So we chose the second route. I was assigned to teach that course a few years ago, and I followed some parts from the book, and the remaining parts, I wrote down the notes and gave it to my students. So with doing this process 2 or 3 times, it just occurred to me that it would be great if I can write a book of my own in which all the topics will be covered instead of assigning 2 or 3 books. Then the next issue was, how will that help the students if I write my book versus somebody else's book, right? So a little bit about my background, that since I came from a foreign country, as you can tell, which had totally free education, both at the school level, high school level, as well as in the college. So since I had completed my education totally freely, I figured that it would be nice if I can make this book online with free access for everyone, not only students, but also people who are interested in these topics of mathematics, which are applicable to medicine and biology. So I just started writing the notes of that book until I happened to meet Cheryl and Joshua on campus. And it was such a pleasant meeting with them because they very much they encouraged me to write the book. And I started writing the book, and that I spent the whole pandemic time. It turns out that pandemic had a good influence on me because that gave me a lot of time at home to write the book, which I did. And I was very fortunate to have Dr. Clayton Hayes helping me out in so many topics. So once all the chapters were finished, I ran them by Dr. Clayton Hayes and gave it to Cheryl and to Joshua. And I'll let them tell you how they felt about reading the book. I hope that the book will be coming out pretty soon, in a few months, and it will be available online for everybody to see.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes.
I want to spin now over to Clayton for a moment and ask. So, what was your experience as a subject librarian helping with the developmental editing process? We kind of roped you in. So when we got this textbook, I was like, I don't read calculus.
Yes.
So we really needed Clayton's expertise. So what was that like for you, Clayton?
Yes. It turns out that writing a book was a very good experience for me because there's an old saying that if you want to learn any subject, the best way to learn the subject is to teach it. When you teach it, you learn a lot. So once I started writing the book, that was even better experience than teaching. Now I would like to say to anybody that the best way to learn a subject is to write a book. And I'm so fortunate that Dr. Clayton Hayes all the time helped me with each and every chapter. So I had a very pleasant experience working with him. And in doing so, actually, we learned a lot of things. I use the word we. I mean, both myself and Clayton, we both actually learned a few things in mathematics as we were writing the book and so on.
Yeah, I do want to make sure that I say that I don't have a PhD, so I appreciate the promotion that you've given me, Joe, but I'm not a doctor of anything, not yet anyway. But yeah, it was a very rewarding, like very fun experience for me as a librarian, but also as somebody. So as Cheryl said, I have a background in math. I got a master's degree in math at Wayne State. But that was, you know, I think I completed that degree in 2010. So it's been a while since I've had the chance to think about a lot of these concepts. And so, yeah, it was a very interesting experience kind of coming back to these things that I hadn't thought about in a while, but also working with Joe, who's coming at it from a different angle than I ever learned these things. You know, there's always these subtle differences that occur or exist between you know, physics and math and how each discipline addresses the same concepts. And so yeah, I'll say also that I have a little bit of editorial experience. Me and Josh worked on a really mathy statistics journal. And so I felt fairly confident coming into this that I could at least provide some sort of competent input. Yeah, I was really thankful that Joe was so kind of open and willing and excited to work with me in going through the chapters and kind of discussing the different questions I had. And yeah, it led to some really interesting conversations and hopefully, you know, push the book to be even more useful than it was even going to be already.
I should also add that my experience was not only very positive, but also very joyful, because everybody knows that any kind of discovery always brings a lot of joy to anybody who discovers that discovery. So when I was writing the book, I discovered a few things in math that I was not aware of previously. especially in those topics. And that also brought me a lot of joy, just learning part.
Yes, that's a great comment, and I want to point out to all of the folks here in the session today that Joe has been an amazing author to work with in terms of his attention to detail and his attention to timelines. So we were really honored to be able to work with him because he made it really easy to get this project done. And I have a question for Joshua about the process and the workflows. Like as we entered this this OER pilot project, what's the thing that maybe surprised you most about embarking on this project, or something, you know, the biggest takeaway from this process so far?
Sure. Well, I found quite a few things surprising about the project, not least of which was the fact that it worked, that we were able to convince the provost to give us enough money to fund not one but two Wayne State textbooks. And so that's an important part of the project for me, I think, was the work leading up to it to develop the argument, provide the cost analysis, and successfully pitch our university to put their money where their mouth is and support projects that both reduce costs for students and raise the profile and the educational achievement at Wayne State University. Not that Wayne State doesn't do that every day, just in the fashion that I wanted them to. I was surprised that we got that. It was surprising to me to find, for instance, that our model publishing contract was not suited for our project. We thought it was a slam dunk that we could reuse this open educational resource, a model publishing contract for digital projects. And what we found was that it needed adaptation in order to be applied in situations like this where we didn't expect a revenue stream from the resulting work. And that was surprising to me, although we were able to adapt that successfully with the help of our student assistant in digital publishing, Caitlin, at the time, and we presented about that at the Library Publishing Forum this year, which should be available should you so wish to find that out. And then I was also surprised at the range of author perspectives on open textbooks. Joe, you can see, was all in from the start. And we had many authors put in bids for open textbooks. Some authors were completely laissez-faire about the idea of making their intellectual property open. And some authors found that they ultimately felt it was too risky to adopt the kinds of open licenses that we required for these open textbooks. And so that was a surprise to me in the procedure of this. Maybe we'll talk about that a little more later. I think those are some surprises. How about you, Cheryl?
I forgot you were going to turn the tables on me. I think probably I would say that the biggest surprise for me was how many faculty wanted to write these books, right? And how many were completely invested and already had the pedagogical voice for doing so, and were willing and interested in having our support developmentally to sort of just touch base with them once every 2 weeks or once a month to say, how's it going? You know, how are you doing? What do you need from us at this point? Yeah. And so I have another question for y'all. This is for all three of you, what made collaboration across these different units, like between the faculty of the libraries, difficult or easier at times?
Well, Cheryl, in my own personal case, just having very cooperating people at the library made the whole project very nice for me. Even though I I took 6 months to complete this book. But those 6 months didn't seem like 6 months. I just thought I just started the book. And then now, day out, day in, I wrote the book. And it was just fun having the people around me who were so nice and cooperative.
Cheryl, I have an answer to the question too. I found that one of the more difficult collaborations in the process was, and both of my examples are from early in the process, from the sort of trying to get the idea of WSU authored open textbooks off the ground. And one of the tricky parts of that is negotiating to bring the right people into the grant review process. So how do we make sure that we end up with a grant review committee that's not ideologically opposed to open textbooks? It's no surprise, I'm sure, to many in the audience that there is some animosity across faculties towards the idea that open textbooks can be academically rigorous. And so we had some tricky negotiation to do to make sure that we didn't get saddled with a review committee that was had some animosity to the project, and that was a difficult engagement. We ended up with a compromise, the Educational Development Grant Committee, but which turned out to be okay, and we ended up with some wonderful projects to work on, but it could have gone completely the other way. And I think that would have been detrimental to the project. So there was some negotiating to collaborate in that way. On the other hand, I agree with Dr. Wadera that collaboration with our authors has been a joy. But I will say too that early in the process, collaboration with the Student Senate and the representatives from the Student Senate was really joyful. It was great to throw our institutional weight behind their initiative, because it's from the voices of the students that any of this is possible. And in fact, it's my unscientific but gut feeling that it is the genesis of this project in the Student Senate's resolution that caught the provost's attention in the first place. That we said, the Student Senate is heavily involved. This rises out of their resolution in support of open textbooks, and we have pitched in to make sure that they have a feasible bid to the president, and working with them on that, and following their leadership. I mean, they didn't just come along for the ride. Stuart, the president of the Student Senate at the time, he organized us like a taskmaster to get this proposal into the provost, and I've never been more overjoyed to be taskmastered, as it were. So that would be my answer to that question.
I'll toss in at the towards the other end of the process. I don't know how much us all working remotely has kind of helped or hindered. I feel like it's been a mixed bag. There was some negotiation that had to take place about, where files were stored and how, like Joe and I, in this case, we're going to pass files back and forth. And so there ended up being, a lot of Word documents flying around, but it all kind of ended up getting ironed out. But as far as like actually sitting down and discussing, that didn't end up being too difficult. Joe and I exchanged phone numbers. We text to arrange times to meet sometimes, and then we'd sit on Zoom usually, and he'd kind of go through that proposed edits, things I had questions about, and we discussed through them if there needed to be a discussion, and if not, he would just say, yeah, I see what you mean, and let's move on to the next thing. So, aside from kind of the logistics of files and keeping things in the right spot and all that, it actually didn't end up being too difficult to make arrangements. Maybe that's just because we were all kind of used to it by the time this started, or by the time my involvement started, at least.
Yeah, those are great answers. And it reminds me that, like, during the pandemic, the digital publishing unit was able to right size, I feel, some of its project scope, right? Where we had been taking on and taking on and taking on before the pandemic. This allowed us to sort of reorient and say, okay, what do we want and need to focus on? And so we, Joshua and I and Clayton gave our project management and editorial expertise in kind to some of these projects, whereas some of the other ones were funded, and we were able to do that because of the change in our workflows, which worked out kind of nicely. I have one last question for the panel before we open it up to questions from the audience, and that's, what do you feel constitutes success in a project like this?
Well, the success of the book, of course, will ultimately be decided by the students who use them. Students not only at Wayne State University, but students everywhere. And not only students, but also the people who are interested in that topic. They may or may not be students, could be just readers who want to read about a particular topic in my book. It will be very helpful for them. So that's the whole point behind open textbook, I guess. By having an open textbook, you are allowing the whole world to come together and learn the knowledge freely. So in a sense, it has removed all the barriers for learning for everybody. And now I sincerely believe that education and learning should be a human right. As all human beings, we should be free to pick up any topic we want to learn about on the internet and go ahead and read as rigorous textbook as we want to for free, or as little as we want to read. All the things are there in front of us.
You floored me, Joe, because I'm thrilled to hear the focus on the audience, which is not, academics or other faculty necessarily, but students, the students who use the textbooks. That success would be constituted by their opinion, and I think that's a fantastic definition of success. In one sense, I feel like we've already succeeded, partly because it often feels like, and I don't know if anyone in the audience shares this feeling, but it often feels like open education initiatives are really organizing projects. Like in the sense of like organizing like you would for a voter drive. You're busy trying to get a lot of people moving in a new direction, and the failures come fast and furious. And so the successes, every little success feels like a success. And this particular project for us had a string of firsts. First time we've caught the president's attention at Wayne State University and had him pitch in. First time we've published open monographs. First time we're seeing this level of faculty interest in an open project coming out of the library system. First time we've collaborated so successfully with the Student Senate. And so those I'm taking those as wins. So already successful in that sense. But I think I'll feel fully successful when the first textbook is in use in an active course at Wayne State, and students are learning without being held hostage to commercial textbook publisher profits. That's when I'll feel the most successful. That's in line with what Joe, you're reminding me, that it's students who will be the measure of our success. Students and other learners who have access for the first time to some of these materials that otherwise would be locked behind a considerable paywall. So that's a definition of success.
I agree.
What Joshua said. Yes. And I also would add that I feel very excited that while we weren't able to do an open peer review process for the proposals, we have been able to move to an open review process, partially open peer review process for the monographs for the OER themselves. And so that's another measure of success from my perspective. So at this point, I'm going to stop asking questions. There's others I can ask, but I want to open it up to the audience to ask the panelists any questions. And you can share those in the chat if you don't want to vocalize them, or you can use your reaction button to raise your hand, and I can call on people, however, whichever is more comfortable for you. We also welcome comments or clarifications, or if you're like, wait a minute, what were you talking about just then?
Cheryl, I just have one comment for you. From my own perspective, personal perspective, having written this book, I had such a joyful experience of learning that I'm looking forward to my next book now. That hopefully next time I teach a different course, maybe I'll try to convert that notes of that course into a book. Yeah.
That is fantastic to hear, Joe.
Yeah.
another great sign of success.
Yes.
If we don't get any questions or comments, could Cheryl or Josh, whoever was more involved, or both of you, talk a little bit about Elizabeth's book? So I don't think I don't know whether we've gotten a sense of that project.
Yes, absolutely. And we can explain the other three too. Joshua, do you want to do that?
Sure. So Elizabeth is writing a book on measurement in education, and so the other three books are well, I guess technical in other senses than the math for biophysicists. The two other textbooks, one is urban health, nursing and urban health, and the fourth textbook is on technical communication, writing in technical communication. And while Joe and Elizabeth are single authors, the other two are collaborative projects. The urban health project has multiple, three primary authors and multiple contributors. And then a pair of professors are writing the technical writing textbook. And they all have various kinds of complexities in terms of the materials that they're leaning on to incorporate, and the focuses that they have in their textbooks. And so each of them has a slightly different sort of development profile, but ultimately all four are geared to be used in the author's actual classrooms. And so we're just thrilled to sort of see the expected impact of these textbooks on our students. I see here that Beth has asked how we chose the platform to host these projects, and that is a fantastic question, Beth. We have a tiered platform model. We're fully intending to host textbooks on a platform that's in development called Vega at Wayne State University. As that comes into fruition, we have digital commons, so all of these will be available as PDF hosted items in Digital Commons at Wayne State University. And we've played a little bit with installs of Manifold with an eye to possibly implementing textbooks there. We haven't completely decided that that is the route that we will go. But it's entirely probable that the textbooks will live in multiple versions on a couple of different platforms once we get to the end of the project. So we absolutely will have PDF versions of the textbooks available immediately. We should have HTML interactive versions slightly later, and then, like I said, we're up in the air about whether we're going to implement Manifold or not. And the how, Beth, the how did we choose that is entirely practical. What do we have access to? Where do we think that these textbooks would best live based on the resources we have? So, like, we're practitioners as much as theorists.
Yeah, and how can we store them for the long term?
Yeah,
Any other questions
No,
from the
I
audience?
just wanted to say thank you. I was wondering, because we're struggling with that at Western. You know, we could put them in Digital Commons, but that would just be PDF. And then, you know, how do we provide EPUBs or other ways? So thank you for your answer.
Yeah, and Manifold it can be a locally hosted solution. It's a possibility for providing EPUB or HTML-like materials. It's something to consider.
I wanted to mention too, while we wait for any other questions, that we have had interns. We've had a series of interns who work with us semester by semester. They might be graduate student assistants in the School of Information Science. They might be undergraduates from the English department. We also have some interns from University of Michigan this summer from their PhD program in film and media. They're not working directly on the OER, but oftentimes these students are working directly on the OER, and we train them to provide either developmental feedback to the authors from a student perspective, or they might end up doing some copy editing or formatting of projects that are in their later stages of production. So I'm happy to touch base with anybody who wants more info on working with interns in the digital publishing unit. And as we finish up, I also want to, I'm going to go back and share my screen for a moment to say that that's not what I want to show you. Those are my notes. Here we go. That we do have a set of supplemental files that we're super willing to share if you want a zip file containing these documents. Our modified MOU, the original funding proposal, which was almost a pre-proposal. It was like, we promise that we'll send you a proposal if you consider this. And the president was like, we'll fund it. And we're like, what just happened? The faculty call for proposals and the evaluation heuristic that we used with the peer review group. So you can email us, and that email goes to Joshua and I, and I'll just send you a zip file back with any of that information. I believe that's it. Thank you so much for attending, y'all.
Well, and I'm sitting here clapping for all of you for sharing. So on behalf of all of us, we want to, again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with all of us here within the Michigan OER Summit. And Joshua, I don't know if you meant to do that or not, but you gave a pretty compelling intro to our next session that is a student panel. So we've got a break plugged in here for about 15 minutes, but then I invite all of you to come back and reconnect with the student panel that will be hosted by Regina Gong and her MSU students. So please come back. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, attendees. And I hope you have a great rest of your summit.
Thank you,
so
Gina.
much,
Thanks,
Gina.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.